Hey friends, neighbors, and comrades, it's Jason Wyman here, and I just wanted to come to you with some updates about my life and my art making. It's been a while, and I know I often share here in this space with all of you, and so just wanted to give an update. You may know that I have been working with Aptos Middle School for a number of months now. I started working with some peer resource classes there in order to examine personal issues and personal beliefs through the lens of memes and zines and media literacy. As a result of my work with peer resources, I was able to gain the confidence to be able to apply for a position with the San Francisco Opera in their Diversity, Equity, and Community Department through the Jerry Rosenstein Art Project. Well, I got the job and was matched with the 6th grade language arts teacher, Miss Becker, in order to provide and create and construct an art project for her 6th grade class. That engagement started in about February, the beginning of February, end of January, beginning of February. And our world has really been upended since then. You know, COVID-19 has really impacted all of our lives. It's impacted every single classroom across the entire globe, not just here in San Francisco or just even here in the United States, but classrooms all across the globe. And even before COVID-19 transformed our reality, the reality of the Aptos students was already pretty complex and complicated. We, Aptos Middle School very specifically, had a write-up in the San Francisco Chronicle, thanks to a columnist there and a podcast there, that produced a very highly prejudiced and highly problematic perspective about Aptos Middle School. In fact, the title of her column was called Lord of the Flies, just to kind of give you an example of how problematic it was. The title was Lord of the Flies, Chaos and Bullying Upends San Francisco Middle School. That's the title. Not so great, coming from a columnist. Just saying, about a middle school that has some issues. Well, anyway, as a result of that, the class that I was supposed to be teaching during that particular project got canceled. And it got canceled because the school had to have school-wide or class-level town halls during the school day in order to deal with the issues and the bias that was actually in that Chronicle column, as well as the subsequent podcast that got produced. Well, I was there to teach media arts, media literacy, zine making, political art making, and so it felt really important to me that not only do we do the project, but that the project actually needs to recenter and reimagine itself moving forward. If the reality of the school is one that is political and is in the media, then our project really needs to think about how is it that we can address the growing narrative within the mainstream press around that particular school. Additionally, the day after the town hall, which is the same week that the podcast came out, students at Aptos Middle School had organized a student walkout in order to demand more money and resources from the school district at their school. One thing is abundantly clear at Aptos Middle School, which is a school of over 1,000 middle school students. It did not have enough funding in order to meet the basic needs of the students. And it still doesn't. That reality is still there, even during this closure. So, the other thing to note here is that some of Miss Becker's students who happened to be in that 6th grade class helped organize the walkout on that Friday. Now, that walkout was actually organized before the San Francisco Chronicle article was published, and the students made a decision to keep the protest going because they knew, one, there was going to be a little bit more media coverage there, and two, they didn't want the mainstream press dictating the timeline of their own organizing when they've already been working on the organizing. So again, these two factors, the closure of my class due to this particular article, matched with student-led organizing, very specifically in the class that I am working in, created the conditions for me to have to reimagine what it was that we were doing and how it was that we were going to be doing it and what the central tenet was of the actual project. So what I ended up doing is I ended up working with Miss Becker in order to recenter the project around personal and collective storytelling and community journalism. So instead of the initial project, which just quickly the parameters of the initial project were to look at some sort of social issue and create some sort of fun or silly object product that could solve that social issue, and then make 30 to 60 second commercials for that. So teaching media literacy in a different way, fun, project-based, silly, kind of playful. I still wanted to keep the playful nature of what we were doing together, and I wanted to keep the nature of focusing on a social issue. The challenge is that Aptos was the social issue. It wasn't just talking about social issues. It's the fact that Aptos was in the news that made it a social issue. And as a result of that, I thought that it was really important to reimagine some of the parameters around which we could be doing our project. And one of those major parameters that I shifted was a focus on community journalism and personal storytelling. So the week after the town hall, I came back on my Thursday morning and we did a zine making workshop. And that zine making workshop was co-facilitated by myself, as well as 8th grade students from the peer resource classroom. So if you remember, I had been working with peer resources in order to design a peer-led zine making workshop already. And so I was able to bring in 4 8th grade students in order to co-facilitate the zine making workshop, where we got Miss Becker's 6th grade class talking about the issues related to Aptos Middle School that they were passionate about and that they were facing, and the beliefs and values that they had about their school. Now, this is a really good priming for thinking very specifically about personal storytelling, because yes, we can often tell beautifully and poignant personal stories, and also they can be politically powerful when we connect our own personal stories to larger societal or communal issues. In this case, the issues that are arising at Aptos Middle School. Now, we don't need to be super didactic or explicit about it. We don't need to say you need to write a personal story about a social issue at Aptos. Instead, what we can do is we can say, what are some of the social issues at Aptos, and what are some of the beliefs and values that we hold at this school, and let's just have some fun making zines about those things. Let's put that to rest. And now let's talk about what our personal stories are. So that is, in essence, what I was doing, and how I made that shift to start is, let's focus on social issues and let's focus on values and beliefs. After that zine making workshop that I did, I produced a community journalism panel. So it was really important for me that the young folks actually get an opportunity to interview journalists, and to interview very specifically community-based journalists and not mainstream journalists, in order to talk about the nuanced difference between mainstream journalism and community-based journalism. In mainstream journalism, there tends to be 2 main factors in terms of who the paper or the publisher is actually, who's the bottom line of the paper or publisher. Those 2 groups tend to be either shareholders, because they are a part of a major corporation that is traded and therefore has a board of shareholders that the publication is actually beholden to. This goes for Fox News, it goes for NBC, it goes for ABC, CNN, the list goes on. Every mainstream publisher has shareholders that they are beholden to. The other people that they are beholden to are advertisers, because that is where the bulk of their money comes from, is through advertising. And so when you think about mainstream news, you have to be aware of the relationships between the shareholders and the advertisers and the news that you are receiving as a way to be able to read that news. Now, community journalism also has bias, and I don't want to negate that community journalism is bias. That being said, community journalism has a different area of focus. Community journalism is often either small business, meaning they do not have a board, they do not have shareholders, they are a small business or a small company. Yes, there might be a main decision maker, and yes, advertisement may be the main revenue source for that small publisher. But within a small business, we know that often the small business is meeting a need of a particular community. And so therefore, that small business needs to actually be responsive to the community in which they are providing that service. Or community journalism can be nonprofit as well. Now, I'm not going to go into my very long critique about how nonprofits are just another side of capitalism. Let's just say we all agree with that. And also, the focus of control within nonprofit journalism is different than in corporate journalism, and that cannot be underestimated when we talk about an understanding of how do we read the news that we are actually consuming. So it was important for me, again, kind of in the nonprofit model really quickly, the area of focus tends to be the explicit community of which that they are writing for. Think about your neighborhood paper. Here in San Francisco, there's Mission Local. Mission Local is writing stories mostly about the Mission District of San Francisco. And it has a need to build trust and authenticity within the community in which it is reporting. In order to do that, that means journalists have to be in relationship with that community in order to generate the stories of interest that will drive their publication. Now, some mainstream journalism does do that. That is some way, there are some ways in which mainstream journalists do build relationships with communities, and that we need journalists to be trusted by communities. But again, let's go back to their main area of focus. And their main area of focus and control will always be their shareholders and will always be their advertisers. Always. So no matter how trusted they may be within a community, their trust needs to be most held by those two people that are either benefiting financially or paying for the benefit. Just as an example. So it was important for me that students at Aptos, and specifically students in the project that I was working with, meet community journalists, and not just meet community journalists, but actually interview those community journalists. So working with Ms. Becker, the students identified about 20 to 30 questions that they wanted to ask the journalists. I brought in 3 different folks, one from Mission Local, one from 48 Hills, and one from People Power Media. And students in Ms. Becker's class had an opportunity to chat with and engage those journalists. After that particular panel, I got an email saying, guess what? Due to COVID-19, I will no longer be able to meet with Ms. Becker's class in person. And so I was really bummed out by that. I wanted to continue to move this project forward, and I thought that it was really crucial that I do so in a way that honors the project and honors the personal storytelling, because here's another pivot. Here's another transition. Here's another moment where we can use storytelling and art making as an opportunity to document our lived experiences. And what happens when we document our lived experiences? Well, we become the writers of history. And this is a very historic moment. So instead of sitting there and kind of beating myself up about like what is going to happen, how are we going to do this, I recognized, at least within myself, what power and control that I had. And the power and control that I had was being able to continue moving forward with this project in a way that, one, meant the timeline was going to have to be extended. So we're looking at, going until May at this point with the project. We weren't looking at it being that long initially. So that's one thing. Two, I needed to switch to a digital platform. So I've been making a lot of physical material in the form of zines and everything. So what I ended up doing is I created a digital zine and then was able to share that with Miss Becker in order to continue moving the project forward. I then recorded a video that I was able to share with the students, or have Miss Becker share with all of the students, that demonstrated all of the things that we needed to talk about. Well, after that lesson on that Thursday, on Friday morning, I got an announcement saying, guess what? All of SFUSD is closing due to COVID-19. And so again, I needed to reimagine the project. We didn't dive right in, actually. We gave time. I think one nice thing that SFUSD did was say to a lot of the teachers and to all of the students, just take this next week and really reimagine like what needs to happen. There is no requirement to produce anything in this week. So I was able to take a week and really kind of sketch out what I thought would be ways in which that we can move the project forward. And so I started talking about style in terms of what kind of style of writing can you have, and what kind of aesthetic, if we're actually creating digital stories, we can also be thinking about aesthetic. We don't just have to be thinking about style. And so I took a look at style through the lens of informational writing, persuasive writing, autobiographical writing, and speculative writing. So 4 different kind of options for the kind of story that you might be able to tell about your lived experience at Aptos. And then I also gave examples of aesthetic. Everything from how do we consider text an aesthetic, to drawings and illustrations, to collage. So again, kind of showing, and collage also being a language of memes. Memes are a language our middle school students know a lot about. And so collage is actually a surprisingly wonderful art form in the fact that young people get it when you present it really quickly. Yay! But anyway, so that's what I did, is I reimagined my lesson into this online platform. I took the time to actually make everything, turn it into Google Slideshows versus zines, so that it was easier for the students, because Google Slideshow is something that they're already being expected to do. So I was able to match them with the technology that the teacher was already instituting. And then I was able to craft some way for them to still contribute to the class in some way, shape, or form. After that, I thought that it was really important that we talk about facts. Often in our personal stories, there are facts that emerge in our personal stories when we're telling them. And often we don't necessarily think about ourselves as the keeper of our own history. And what does it mean to be the keeper of our own history, or the teller of a collective history? What does that actually mean? And what responsibility do I have towards facts and truth as I am putting forward my story? And so I shared with them a very simple way to start thinking about their stories, identifying facts, and finding ways to use sources like eyewitnesses or documentation as a means to check those facts. So I did a whole lesson on that, and what is facts, and how do we check them, and how do we cite sources that are eyewitnesses, like our peers, or like a text message that I might be sending to someone, and using that as documentation for your own personal story. So I did that piece. And then I created another video and a final one all about the final draft. So how do we get from where we are into actually crafting a real story with a title, a story, and a bibliography using MLA style as a means for citing our sources, whether those be personal interviews or text messages or email chains or articles online, and how and why should we have a combination of those sources when we're actually thinking about our personal stories? Because, let's be real, we are the ones writing our own history in this moment, which means we can be the source of our own truths. Now, this might seem a little truthiness or fake news, and you might be right. I also want to counter with, often within historically disempowered and marginalized communities, we do not have the opportunity afforded to us to be able to understand and make meaning of fact and truth without some sort of institution claiming that that is fact or truth. And so it is up to us to be able to provide an opportunity and a view for young people and for folks that might be new to this to think about how they can go about checking the pieces of the facts of their own stories. And that means having a conversation with that friend who, let's just say, you viewed an incident of bullying at your school, and you have a narrative in your own head about that bullying incident. Great. And also, there are probably other people that were there, and it might be important for you to also check in with them so that the narrative you're running in your head is actually a more informed narrative than just one that's of speculation and gossip. That is the kind of rigor that we are teaching in my Aptos story. It is also a tool of ethnography. In the light of ethnography, I think it is important for me right now to name how it is that I was able to arrive at this particular moment in time. And I know that this is a long video already. It's at 22 minutes. Oh my God, I can talk. And also, I think it's really crucial that I not skip this component in this video. So please stay with me and listen to a bunch of names and people that I am grateful to in order to be at this particular moment in time and able to take a look at this project in this light and be able to shift it in a way that is actually meeting the needs of the students while also repositioning it within a new emergent reality that also is able to use it as an opportunity to use narrative as a political statement. So here is how I want to do this. First, I want to say a huge, huge, huge thank you to the Aptos community, just in general. I was introduced to Aptos Middle School almost 20 years ago thanks to Aaron Reedy and the School Health Programs Department. I was new at the OMI Excelsior Beacon Center at Denman Middle School, and I was looking for exemplary after-school programs that centered young people. And that is how I got connected to Erin, who was running it through the Stonestown YMCA at the time, and she had a youth council. And by being able to watch the way in which Erin listened to the students at Aptos in order to create her after-school program, or the after-school program of Aptos, influenced me to bring back the concept of youth councils into the OMI Excelsior Beacon Center in a very concrete way that was relevant to the Beacon Center at Denman. So one huge thank you, huge, huge, huge thank you to Aaron Reedy and to the Aptos community over 20 years ago for having an exemplary program that listened to young people and incorporated their feedback into the after-school program. 1. 2, peer resources. Peer Resources is an organization that I have known, again, also for 20 years. I was introduced to Peer Resources at the same time that I was introduced to Aptos Middle School. And I was introduced to Peer Resources thanks to Patty and Nancy. Patty and Nancy are two amazing luminaries here in the Bay Area. In fact, Patty is currently the Beacon Director of the OMI Excelsior Beacon Center. And way, way, way back in the day, 20 years ago, Patty and Nancy were helping run a program called Changemakers, which was teaching young people organizing skills in the out-of-school time in order for them to run youth-led political campaigns. That definitely informed my vision of political education and why it is crucial to actually layer in a political framework when we're talking about our work and creating our work together. Additionally, it introduced me to Peer Resources, which also has school day programs in middle and high school schools across San Francisco that teach peer education, human-centered design, and a variety of other things, including peer mediation. As a result of being introduced to Peer Resources over 20 years ago and sustaining a relationship with them over those 20 years, when I had an idea about a zine making workshop and wanting to introduce the concept to middle and high school students to see if they would be interested in co-designing workshops with me, Peer Resources was the one that said yes and invited me back into Aptos Middle School, specifically with Renee Lee, in order to do that work. And it is directly because of Peer Resources and my partnership with Renee that I was able to even consider applying for the position at the San Francisco Opera's Jerry Rosenstein's arts program. So I just want to name that. That's really, really crucial to actually name. Additionally, I want to untether one other thing. Renee Lee. Thank you to Renee. Renee, many years ago, about 5 years ago, I was working at Youth Speaks here in San Francisco, and I had a conundrum, basically. I was not happy working there personally. I was feeling very much that there was a misalignment of values between myself and the organization. Now, I know You Speaks does amazing work and is doing some really incredible work in spoken word and poetry and vulnerability with young people. But for me personally, my values and the values of the organization were not in alignment, and I needed to leave. Well, as I was transitioning out of my position, Renee Lee stepped in and was actually taking on some of the administrative tasks that I had been doing. And so I had already been introduced to Renee thanks to my time at You Speaks. And so when I put out a call, it wasn't just a connection with Peer Resources. It was a reconnection with a former colleague of mine. And we were able to really connect on how do we center young people within our own classrooms and within our own projects. So a huge shout out to Renee Lee. I also just want to say thank you to the current cadre of teaching artists for the San Francisco Opera who have really, the diversity, equity, and community department at the San Francisco Opera. Cole, Chip, Clara, and Ryan have all been a huge support as I try to figure out and make this potential transition. They've really encouraged me and really made me feel like I can be experimental and try things out, and that's okay. And get paid for it. Thank you very much for that. It's amazing. And then finally, and definitely not least, are all of the students of Miss Becker's class and Miss Becker. Without you, we have no project. We have no My Aptos story. And it is because of you that we are able to mold and adapt and change in a way that is trying to really meet you where you're at. Now, that's a lot. Yay! Thank you for watching and listening to my long and lengthy ethnography. Again, ethnography and citation is crucial and important. We have the opportunity to write our own histories. And when we write our own histories, we need to name the people, ideas, and relationships that make them matter to us. These are the people that matter to me. These are the people that have inspired and supported me over my 20 plus years of living and creating in San Francisco. And without them, I could not do what I am doing in this particular moment in time. So thank you. Thank you to everyone that has made it possible for me to be here. Thank you to you watching this video. And now go out there and tell your story. Think about what is crucial for you to share in small and significant ways. Because right now, we are the ones writing our own histories. And if we don't write it, someone else will. Get to writing. Ciao for now.